Welcome back. This is the last segment of Citizens Forum, being filmed on December 8th, 2015. Our guest in this segment is Will Smith, and we're going to be talking about...
Well, we're going to talk about an aspect of consciousness that I think is important for everybody who wants to start getting with this change of consciousness that we're experiencing. The first thing that we've talked about is just knowing that you're not your body, but this part is knowing that time flows differently, that we have this idea of time, the way it flows, that is not really true. We have a consensus reality view of time, but it doesn't work really like that. It really is a very discrete and particular. And the biggest example of that I just thought of before the show is if you look at the moon has always looked, you can see the same craters, you can see it looks exactly the same. There's no erosion because there's no wind, there's no water. But if I lived in Costa Rica for a while where there's lots of wind and lots of water and there are 5 tectonic plates banging against each other. So there's lots of action down there. And in 1 year, a place it can be overgrown. If there was a big ditch or something, it can be completely overgrown and healed in a year. So time flows differently depending on what else is going on. And our perception of time is also very important. So I wanted to do... the first thing I want to do is just show us how using the TV as a way of demonstrating this. We're just going to do a little experiment here. And the first one, I'm just going to move my arm. I need the camera on for me, and I'm just going to move my arm. And what we saw there is different because what we saw here is different from what I'm going to show when we edit. I'm going to show that the arm is made up of individual pictures. And then if we can just switch to the wide shot for 30 seconds, we'll see something else. So now we've seen a scene. Now we've seen a scene compressed into a very short time. And I'm going to tell you, I'm just going to switch to a different thing. I meet a lot of people on Facebook, and there's some people that I just know I'm going to like this person. So I met this guy named Andrew, and he's a translator. He does a lot of things, I suppose, but one of the things is he likes to translate old poetry, Greek poetry. So he put up this poem that he translated. It's a fragment from Sappho, who was a woman writer in ancient Greece, and she wrote poetry, and she lived on the Isle of Lesbos. And you can look all this up. It's a very interesting story. But we only have fragments of her poetry. We know her more by her reputation, that she was a great poet, than the actual works. So I read this poem that he translated, and I'll read it. Within, cold water splashes beyond apple branches, and the place is all shadowy with roses. A dreamless sleep falls from the shimmering leaves. Now this is Sappho inviting Aphrodite, the goddess of love, into her garden. So she's using this imagery, but notice that she didn't say, I'm going to paint you a picture of what it's like. She just started off into it. So when I read that poetry, and it was only 5 or 10 seconds, and then I stopped reading it, I realized that I had been somewhere else during that little time. So the idea is that some people like to give this model of our reality is really discrete reality. It's chunks of things. We don't experience time continuously, really. And in our consensus reality, we look at and we all agree that this is what's happening. But that's not really what's so. And the example story that I want to give of that is, I read about the Titanic. I like the Titanic as an allegory. So if you think about the story of the Titanic, what happened?
The ship sank.
The ship sank, and what else happened? Everybody died, yeah, everybody died, but not really everybody, but most people died. But this little 8-year-old kid, he was put on a boat, and he said he just went under a bench and fell asleep, and when he woke up, the sun was shining and everything was great. So what was the thing for him? He didn't...
So that was his experience of the sinking of the Titanic.
Yeah, but his reality was
different.
Completely different from the captain of the boat, all the lots of other people. So that's what we are getting used to, is a different way of looking things. And I found a TV show that kind of shows this. There's a TV show called Psych, and it's about this psychic detective. And he pretends that he's psychic in front of the police, but then they show you what's really happening with shots. So he'll notice something that nobody else sees. And maybe sometimes they slow it down so you can see that he noticed something that nobody else sees, because their reality is consensus reality, but he notices things. So what I want to talk about here is that we can each notice things about what we actually are seeing. And a good way to do that is, at the end of the day, think about, what did I do today? What happened to me today? And if you do that, if you think about what happened to you today, then certain things will pop out of your mind. And the thing is to learn to notice what you're noticing. Instead of just thinking about the thing, you think about, now wait, that's funny. I saw a squirrel on Pandora. Now why is that the first thing that pops into my mind? Why was a squirrel so important? And that's going to lead you down some really interesting things that will change your consciousness, because you'll realize that you're aware of all sorts of different things going on around you, but you can't instantly say all the different things that are happening. There would just be too much information. And so our consciousness, we learn to filter out the things that we think don't matter. But what we're shifting to now is a realization that if we only pay attention to consensus reality, we're going to miss a lot of really important things. And the reason this is so important for our political system, for the kinds of things that you want to talk about with democracy and voting, is that we're being lured into this place of believing anything, right?
Absolutely. Well,
so there's this play made of what we're supposed to think about something,
yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you take as that. Eventually, nobody's going to believe it anymore, because I mean, everybody knows the Aesop's fable about the little boy who cried wolf, right? Well, if somebody keeps lying to you, eventually you say, I'm not going to believe him anymore.
Well, I've reached that point.
You certainly have, but a lot of people haven't.
A lot of people haven't. And I completely understand that, because for a good chunk of my life, I also didn't. So, I mean, I was alive when the Vietnam War was started and ran through, and I believed the whole thing. I believed every lie I was told by CBC and CTV and all the newspapers and all the politicians, and, you know, that was the lie. Then you find out later that the whole war was kind of fake, because the people who run the United States wanted to have a war. And
right,
that was the real story.
Yeah, there's an agenda. Well, but then there's this consensus reality created to prove that this is why we need to go to war. And there are all sorts of things that are done. So,
and when they're doing it to us again right now,
it's just the fact of life. But we're getting to a point now where people are starting to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not going to believe that. I
hope so.
Because, I mean, you can't have, well, I don't need to go into specific examples here. I can learn to be just polite about it. But I think that what we need to see is that we don't need to create a new consensus reality. We just need to honor everybody's particular or discrete reality, as I like to call it. So, in other words, if somebody says, gosh, you know, I walked through your garden and I saw a gnome, then you don't say, you didn't see a gnome. You say, oh, really? What was he wearing?
Yeah. Well, I would, if somebody said, walked through my garden, if I had one, and said I saw a gnome, you know, I'm to the point where I think, you know, just about anything is possible.
Yeah, I'm using an example that some people might consider absurd, but what I'm saying is it's a shift in attitude of saying what's important is that everybody sees the same thing. That's how our system works right now. It's important that everybody see the same thing. You saw those buildings fall down, didn't you? Yep, I saw them. Yep. Okay. Well, you agree? And if somebody says, I didn't see it the way you did. Well,
yeah.
But instead, our attitude is, this person has a gift. This person can see something different. This person can, so that's what, it's a shift in the way we see things and the way we treat each other. Because right now, for example, for kids, we say, oh, we have a box here. We've created this society, and the people who know better than anybody else have created this little box, and it looks like you're going to fit into that box. So if we just grind off a little bit here and cut off your leg here, you're going to fit in that box, and you're going to just do a really good job for us in society for the rest of your life. And instead, what we need to go to is more of a system where it's more of a mentor type thing. The way this has existed in human history is a mentor type situation where the teacher tries to find out, what are your gifts? What are you good at?
Yes.
What makes you happy? What is it that makes you get up in the morning that you look forward to?
Isn't that what school should be?
It should be, but notice that it isn't anymore. It's finding the right box for you.
Yes,
We've
yes,
established boxes, and those are created.
Imagine
usually
how
by
wonderful
corporations.
school could be if it was more like that. They welcomed you in and said, here you are, and we just want to help you have a good time and be a great person.
Yeah,
Wow.
and the more I look at this, this being on this show has been instrumental in changing my own consciousness about this. That if we focused on finding out who each child actually is and giving them the tools that they need to explore that and develop it, what kind of a society we live in? Somebody would have found a battery that would make petroleum unnecessary. I mean, I can just imagine all sorts of things, but that's not what we do.
Yeah. And you know what? I think the teachers would have a much better time. The kids would have a much better time. So why doesn't it happen?
Well,
And
I think that's what's coming. I think that
right.
what I see is that our system has gone, as I say, if a guy lies to you, after a while, everybody just says, don't believe anything he says. Well, our system has been so gamed now. I don't think our new system is going to look anything like our old system, because nobody's going to put up with it.
Will Smith, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me again, Jack.
Thanks for watching Citizens Forum this week.